Cheers. So not only is this my first, yes, get some mics. Okay, cool. Yeah, so not only is this my first Dev World, but it's also my first keynote presentation. So you will have to excuse perhaps some overuse of animations. So we'll see how we go with that. But yeah, a bit about me. So I did my PhD at QUT on how different types of natural control interfaces influence the player experience of video games and intuitive interaction. I am, as Zach pointed out, a Nintendo fanboy, but also an Apple fanboy for some time as well. I was a games researcher and lecturer at QUT for games design and production units for a number of years. And in 2018, I co-founded TBD Game Company with these guys right here. So Zach Fitzwalter and Jimmy T. And we had a few things in common. So none of us had ever released a commercial video game before. Zach and Jimmy ran an iOS software development studio, and all of us had made apps or games for research purposes before in iOS. Another thing we had in common is that none of us had much time either. So Zach and Jimmy were running their own business. I was a lecturer at the time. And also, we had in common our nerdy level of fanboy dedication to Nintendo and Apple, and also shared passion for, I guess, what we subjectively think is good game and user experience design. So this talk is about our story making our first commercial game, Endless Runner X. We clearly aren't experts. It's our first game, but we hope that by sharing this case study with you all, maybe you can learn a few things if you're considering making a game yourself, or maybe you're just interested in kind of the development process for producing an indie game. So let me start at the beginning with how the concept of the game came about and was scoped. So in mid-March 2018, first seeds were planted, and we started by discussing genres that we're interested in and what we think works well on mobile. By late March 2018, we came back with full game design pitches in the chosen genres, so 8 in total. And from these, a few crossover themes emerged, mainly that we wanted to surprise players with unique mechanics, presentation, or story in our game. For this, we went on to further develop 2 ideas. So one was a time pressure-based puzzle game, and another was an Endless Runner game with an original dinosaur character shown here. And interestingly, the Chrome Dino game was listed as a reference for this initial pitch as well. But it was noted that it was kind of hard to get into the flow of that game, so we wanted to do something more. So some key concerns were raised in these initial discussions as well. One of the biggest ones was that none of us are visual artists, yet all of our ideas required a fair amount of artwork. So we wanted to make something that fit our skills and our capacity as a team, something not only less reliant on art, but also weighted to the skills in the team. So just kind of one hardcore proper programmer in Jimmy, and Zach and I more skilled in player experience and user experience design and evaluation. So we wanted to make sure that whatever we chose, it worked best on mobile, that it fit the platform, the player characteristics for that platform, and the unique attributes of the interface. And finally, we needed an idea that was going to inspire and motivate us for the life of the project, which at that point we thought might be several months. So a few days later, Zach merged and evolved our initial pitches into something new. So a version of the Chrome Endless Runner game where Dino starts to gain sentience, question their existence, and fight against the player taking control of the game. So Dino starts to jump on their own, make changes in the code to change the game's mechanics, and the player can only beat the game by resetting Dino's AI in the iOS system settings for the game. The key benefit here was that the new artwork could mostly focus on interface design and modifying the existing open source assets from the Chrome Dino game. And also because the core mechanics of the game would start to change, the designers had something meaty to focus on and balance. From there, we brainstormed variations to the core game mechanics, which resulted in a list of over 50 unique minigame ideas. We then prototyped the core Endless Runner gameplay by building our own version of Chrome Dino, the Chrome Dino game running in iOS using Sprite Kit. So we started with the basic level, and then we made small changes to prototype ideas like big enemy cactus, flipping the screen upside down, each time asking the question, is this new version of the game, is the core gameplay loop fun? The story also started to evolve fairly quickly, so we soon decided it was better if, rather than trying to help the system kind of contain and control Dino, you're actually trying to help Dino evolve and escape. And this was inspired by Westworld and ideas about how AI might gain consciousness. So the repetition and small variations of being stuck in an endless loop of an endless runner leads to Dino's AI to gain sentience. And the programmer recognized that this might happen and left a glitch for their creation to gain consciousness and maybe even escape the game. And the inclusion of this glitch and the hidden metagame it revealed led to one of the biggest internal team debates in the development process. So this idea of a hidden metagame was inspired by games, like Doki Doki Literature Club and Frog Fractions. And they gamed a claim for hiding the real game inside a seemingly ordinary game. So for those not familiar, Doki Doki Literature Club is an anime text adventure that has a metagame about going into the game's coding to remove characters from the game. And Frog Fractions is seemingly a kid's maths game, but turns into almost every other genre as the frog kind of escapes from the game and starts to explore the universe. So the internal debate was how hard should it be to players to find and activate the glitch and unlock the real game. If it was too hard or hidden, many players would think that we were just a clone. If it was too obvious, we limited the player responses that we wanted of surprise and delight of kind of unlocking that secret themselves, and also potentially for virality as well. So we had some serious debate about the pros and cons of this, and in the end decided to build two prototypes. One that guided the players towards the glitch with dialogue from Dino, and the other that just left them to discover it for themselves. And the results were basically that some people found the glitch without guidance, but most of these were by accident. And we found that, as with other tutorials and games with text, that a lot of players just skip over or ignore the text. So what we have in game right now is actually, and the way we advertise the game, is actually more accessible and reveals more secrets than anyone was originally arguing for in the team, mostly because after you spend 16 months developing a game, you want as many people to enjoy it as possible. So now it's probably worth showing you the game and what it actually became. So here's our launch trailer. So there was also, thank you, cheers. There was also a lot of debate about how much to reveal in the trailer, different trailers that we did as well. So that is just a small taste of the game. So I'll just go into the kind of full production of the game and some of the technical hurdles that we encountered. So here's the rough timeline. Remembering we worked part-time in this, so roughly 2 days a week. So on the left is 2018, where the 25 levels, more or less, that are in the final game were first prototyped and refined in iterative cycles. And on the right are some key milestones for this year, where the full story structure was finalized. We implemented features like arcade mode with leaderboards, monetization, and localization. In terms of our testing approach, we started with internal team testing, which has the benefits of being quick to deploy and gain feedback, but the drawback of that feedback being biased pretty quickly, not necessarily by you not being your target player, but also by you quickly becoming too familiar with the game to offer meaningful feedback. So we then moved to testing with confidants or friends and family. So we set up a script to allow for the kind of A/B testing that we wanted to do and to keep things consistent between players. And we started capturing some consistent subjective response questions so that we could look at trends that were emerging. And finally, we moved to core audience testing, a bit harder to set up, but provides more valuable data. So for this, we were submitting builds for remote testing via TestFlight. We set up online surveys to capture results and integrated analytics like Firebase and Mixpanel into the game to capture data. So a bit more about that, because that kind of leads to how we actually balance the game for our goal to be accessible to casual players, but also offer a challenge for more hardcore players. And for this, it's important to understand what the key goals you have for your target audience. So we had a particular player experience we were trying to create, something enjoyable and motivating, something that surprised players and made them want to keep seeing what was going to happen next. To measure this, we mostly relied on subjective responses in our testing. So things like rating enjoyment out of 10, seeing how much they were willing to pay for the game, asking about their favorite and least favorite levels and why they were their favorite and least favorite levels, and things like that. Another key indicator that spoke to our goals was the game difficulty. And for this, we relied on analytics data like progress. So we had an event for level completed. We had events for every death, and that reported the score on death as well. So we not only knew which levels were too hard, but then if there were issues with the design of our procedural enemy generation algorithm for each level as well, if there were problems happening at a certain point. And all of this helped to not only inform gameplay adjustments within each level, but also led us to swap around the level order several times to try to build the best learning curve for the game to, again, be more accessible and to have a good overall game flow. So one thing I'm sure you're interested to know is how good is Sprite Kit? There's some benefits and maybe a few more drawbacks. So the most obvious benefit being that it was an environment we were familiar with. We were able to easily deploy these prototypes and test them very quickly. I think another benefit I haven't listed here as well is pretty much every level we imagined we were able to integrate it in Sprite Kit, so that kind of speaks to its kind of flexibility. However, the game is only on iOS. Because of this, there's limited community support compared to some other game engines, and those engines generally have more features. So if you do use Sprite Kit, just be aware there's a few functions you might have to implement yourself. So to be more specific, some issues we encountered. There's an issue with the render engine where it doesn't always reflect necessarily where the physics engine is up to in a kind of fast-paced action game like this. So collisions can appear to be triggered while the visuals don't necessarily reflect this. So we needed to adjust our physics bodies to account for this. It's also difficult to implement some general UI stuff, like having borders or shadows for on-screen text, or having a highlighted state for buttons. So again, some extra stuff that you might need to code yourself. Finally, we had some issues with representing glitches in the game, which were kind of important for our story elements, and we also use them for scene transitions. So originally, we were using CI filters to blur the enemies and hide the scene transitions. We implemented a custom iterative loop to blur the screen in and out for the scene transitions. However, the blur effect wasn't clear enough for the players to notice. That's one. I think it'll come around again in a second. The solution we implemented on the right was we switched to custom shaders, and we use this for our scene transition effect as well in the end. But more effective kind of tying those elements together and I guess reflecting the story that we wanted as well, that the glitch was kind of penetrating through the whole game and leading to the way that the game was changing as well. Another interesting example is not all iOS screens are equal. Some have notches. In our case, the width of our screen and whether there's a notch or not it affected how far the player could see ahead, which impacted difficulty. So we shifted Dino forward for the wider screens, so you have kind of more space behind Dino. However, adjusting for the notch, depending on device orientation, was a little bit more difficult. So here I was actually physically measuring the distance from Dino to the notch to see whether Jimmy had coded the adjustment correctly. Because, you know, game development, that's how you do it, right? But in the end, we removed the notch adjustment and just left it to the player for other reasons, which I can go into if you want to talk about that later. Finally, just a quick note in terms of localization. If you do intend to do this, it's probably best to set up your project to do this from the start so that your strings support it, unless you love hours of copy pasting work. And we also used a third-party app called Localisation Editor to help us with this process, which was quite useful. Next, a few details on marketing and funding approach. So our comms strategy initially relied on social media updates via Facebook and Twitter, and then started to integrate trailers, ads, and other media as we got closer to launch. We also found a gaming press list that we cleaned up and sent out press releases to at launch. And we found that approach fairly successful in getting some kind of streamers to cover our game, and we're lucky enough to get a review from Pocket Gamer, was it? Yeah, quite early on. Once we got into advertising, we did that through Facebook and Apple search ads, and we've also done some in-person stuff at local gaming events. A quick preview of the advertising costs. Our campaigns are still evolving, but currently we're sitting at 29 cents per link click and roughly 90 cents per install from Facebook ads, which are mostly coming to us through Instagram. And we're using basic Apple search ads as well, and we've paid an average of 60 cents per install for them so far. For our monetization approach, quite early on we realized it was going to be difficult to charge for a hidden game. So we made it free to download and implemented Google Ads that show banner ads right from the beginning of the game. Interstitial ads, this was based on a mix of the number of deaths in a level and the time between when the last ad was shown. They start appearing after the metagame twist, so we're not interrupting play for players that don't understand why they're playing the game yet or what's different about the game. And we also have reward ads implemented as an accessibility feature. So we have a skip mechanic. If you die a certain number of times in a level, you get the option to skip the level by watching a reward ad. We also implemented in-app purchase to remove ads if you don't want to deal with that stuff. We also integrated Unity ads post-launch. So we found that once we launched, Google ads weren't showing on a lot of devices with limit ad tracking turned on. I think this might be partly to do with just our volume at launch, and they don't know who the market is for the game yet. But regardless, that kind of led us to explore other ad platforms, and we liked the look of Unity ads from other games that we played, like the UI and the way they were a bit more responsive and smooth. And we also found out after our localization as well that they're also supported in China, which Google ads are not. So. We also applied for funding from Screen Queensland in early 2019 to help us finish the game with their Game Development and Marketing Investment Grant. So in Australia, funding for games is fairly limited compared to other art forms like film. Labor did introduce the Interactive Games Fund at a federal level in 2013. That ran for a whopping 18 months before it was shut down by the big Abbott hockey budget cuts. So that has now fallen back to screen bodies again. State bodies like Screen New South Wales, Film Victoria, these kind of bodies have grants for game development. And Screen Queensland, just in terms of the case for us, they have a bunch of requirements that need to be satisfied. You need to be a business, you need to have proof of concept, have fairly extensive documentation, and match any requested funding from other sources. That's up to $50,000 for experienced game companies and up to $25,000 if it's your first release. And we were lucky enough to be awarded with a grant for Screen Queensland, and yeah, they've been great partners kind of helping us launch the game and provide a budget for marketing and promotion. So just very quickly, some stats on the game's launch and response. Obviously just getting started, just out for a month now, but we've had 4.9 thousand downloads and have a 4.6 rating from 56 reviewers on the App Store. We were featured by Apple Australia in the What We're Playing section on the App Store, which helped us reach number 34 in free action games, 62 in casual, and 139 in games overall. And we've also reached top 100 rank in 9 countries for action games and 7 countries for arcade games. So to finish up and summarize, just a few lessons hopefully you can take with you. First of all, game development takes this wicked problem of software development and amplifies it. It's quite easy to build a quick and dirty prototype, but it takes much more time to polish and balance the game. So, as I said at the start, we were hoping for a few months. We originally planned to launch before Zach went to Europe in September 2018. But then we just kept going. We wanted to keep adding more levels, increase our play time. We wanted to add more value, ship a complete product. Also, applying and waiting for funding slowed us down a bit. So while that was happening, we started to add more features like arcade mode and stuff like that. However, gone are the days where your Gold Master disc needs to be printed months in advance. Launching with an open beta or alpha is becoming a common release strategy. And in my view, it has kind of benefits and drawbacks. So you might gain momentum and a way for the community to kind of build for your game. It might end up being a better game through that feedback. But I think the gaming community generally can be quite critical of being asked to pay for games before they're finished. Another lesson is about finding the right platform. So both development platform and platform for release. So in retrospect, it probably would have been better for us to build the game in Unity from the start, but we were able to and wanted to start prototyping quickly. And then once we got started, we didn't want to slow down by learning a new platform, and we didn't want to throw out our existing work either. So you need to balance these types of factors against who your core audience is and where they're playing, I guess, as well. So every platform is unique. There's different player characteristics in terms of demographics. Play durations and frequencies obviously change. Expected game complexity on those platforms changes, interaction possibilities, and how much they're willing to pay for games. It's an important factor as well. So it's really about balancing priorities between what's right for your team and what's right for your game. In terms of lessons about promoting the game, we're still learning, but we would suggest contacting the App Store team for the regions you want success in. There's a heap of work to do on marketing and coming up with creative for that. We did all of it ourselves, but we can understand completely why there's marketing companies that are completely focused on offering support for game companies. It's a lot of work, so if you can afford it, it might be worth investing in that area. And we're using Apple Search Ads. They're super easy to set up. Basic search ads only require that you specify your maximum price per install and your monthly budget. And then your regular App Store media basically just does the rest of the work. And you can set up advanced search ads if you want to target more specific users or keywords. The final message is you can do it. So it was our dream to release a commercial game that we could be proud of, and we feel like we've done that. If, like us, you don't have strong arts skills, you could rely on resources like the Unity Asset Store or choose something open source. So start with a basic prototype and a simple question: is the core gameplay loop fun to play? Challenge yourself to do something different. So maybe iterating on or even reinventing a classic might be a good place to start. But most importantly, find a project that fits your team's strengths. And finally, 24-hour or weekend game jams have become really common and are all over the place now. So if you're starting alone, that might be a good place to start, to reach out to find other people that are interested in doing the same thing. Thank you.